March 10th, 1945. Cold rain fell on Camp Crossroads, Pennsylvania. The kind of rain that soaked through wool and settled into bones. The kind that made you remember every mistake that brought you to this moment. A military transport truck rolled through the gates. Its canvas cover sagged under the weight of water. Inside, 32 women sat in silence. Not the comfortable silence of people at peace. The hollow silence of people who had learned that words cost energy they could not afford to spend. Annalisa Hartman was 24 years old. She had been hungry for so long that hunger no longer felt like pain. It felt like identity. It felt like the truest thing about her. She sat near the truck's tailgate, her back straight despite exhaustion. Posture was one of the last dignities a person could maintain. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers laced together to stop them from trembling. Every movement she made was calculated, measured. Conservation of energy had become as natural as breathing. The woman beside her was younger, 21. Margareta Vogel, though everyone called her Greta, she had been a clerk in Munich before the world ended. Before the word before started to mean something sacred, something lost, Greta clutched her stomach with both hands. The truck's movement made her dizzy. Whether from motion or malnutrition, she could not say. After a certain point, all discomfort blended into one dull ache that filled every hollow space inside you. Across from them sat Wilhelmina Lehmann, Mina, 27 years old. Though her eyes looked decades older, she had 2 sons, 8 and 11. She had not heard from them in 4 months. The not knowing was worse than hunger, worse than cold, worse than everything except the possibility that knowing might be even worse than not knowing. Mina's hands shook constantly now, not from fear, from the simple fact that prolonged starvation does things to the nervous system, things that cannot be hidden, things that betray you even when you try to appear strong. Behind Mina sat another woman, older than most, Ingrid Werner, 35, former nurse from Frankfurt. She had served in field hospitals near the Eastern Front, had seen things that left marks deeper than scars, things that made civilian suffering seem almost gentle by comparison. Ingrid's face was set in expression of stoic endurance. Not hope, not despair, just acceptance that whatever came next would be endured, because endurance was what remained when all other options disappeared. She had watched men die from wounds, from infections, from simply giving up. She would not give up. Giving up was luxury for people who had not seen what happened when you stopped fighting. The truck stopped. 32 women tensed as one. This was it, whatever came next, good or bad, mercy or cruelty. You never knew with captors. You hoped. But hoping was dangerous. Hope could break you faster than hardship. American voices outside. Orders given in English. Annalise understood fragments. Her English was basic, but functional. She had worked as a radio operator in Berlin, back when Berlin still stood, back when there was something to operate. The canvas flap opened. Rain hammered down. An American sergeant stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, red hair darkened by water. He looked at them with an expression Annalise could not read. Not hatred, not pity. Something else. Something she had not seen in a very long time. His voice carried a thick accent. Boston, she would learn later. Irish Boston. "Welcome to Camp Crossroads, ladies. I'm Sergeant Declan O'Malley. We're going to get you inside now, out of this rain." He said it like it mattered, like their comfort was something worth considering. Annalisa felt a small crack in the protective numbness she had built around her heart. She could not afford cracks. Cracks let hope in. Hope was a luxury for people who had not lost everything. They climbed down from the truck, one by one, slow, careful, moving like old women, though most were under 30. The grey auxiliary uniforms they wore hung loose on diminished frames. Clothes made for bodies that no longer existed. Annalise's feet hit the ground. For a moment, the world tilted. She steadied herself against the truck's side. No one noticed, or if they did, they had the grace not to comment. They all understood. You hid weakness when you could. You acknowledged it only when you must. Ingrid Werner was last to descend. Her movements were measured, clinical. She had learned in field hospitals to conserve energy for when it truly mattered, to move efficiently, to waste nothing on unnecessary motion or emotion. Camp Crossroads looked like every military facility Annalise had ever seen. Precise rows of buildings, wire fences, guard towers, the architecture of control, the geography of confinement. But something felt different here. She could not name it yet, could not trust it. But something in the way the guards moved, the way they looked at the prisoners, not with the contempt she had learned to expect, not with the calculation of men deciding who was useful and who was not. They were marched to a processing building. More Americans waited inside. A woman this time, captain's insignia on her uniform. She looked like New England, like old money and good schools, and the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. I'm Captain Eleanor Bradford. You'll be processed here. Medical examinations, delousing, assignment to barracks. We follow Geneva Convention protocols. You will be treated according to international law. Her voice was crisp, professional, not unkind, but not warm. The voice of someone doing her duty correctly, but without sentiment. Medical examinations revealed what they all knew: malnutrition, various stages of deficiency diseases, bodies pushed to the edge of function, but not beyond. They had survived this long. They would survive longer. Humans could endure remarkable things when the alternative was unthinkable. The American doctor who examined Annalise was gentle. He looked at her chart and frowned, not with judgment, with concern. When did you last have a proper meal? She tried to remember. Weeks, months. Time had become elastic, meaningless. I do not remember. He nodded, made notes. Said something to a nurse about careful refeeding, about risks, about syndrome she did not understand. She caught the word fatal and felt a cold spike of fear. You could die from eating too much after starving too long. The body could turn against you even in abundance. Even rescue could kill. Ingrid Werner, being examined in the next station, listened to the same warnings with professional detachment. She understood refeeding syndrome, had seen it in field hospitals when supplies finally arrived after weeks of shortage, had watched soldiers die from eating too much too fast after prolonged deprivation. The irony of survival being fatal had never stopped being cruel. They were assigned to barracks, clean, sparse, beds with actual mattresses, blankets, pillows, luxuries beyond imagining. Annalise sat on her bunk. The mattress gave beneath her, soft. After months of sleeping on floors, on bare ground, on surfaces that offered nothing but hardness, this felt like sin, like something she did not deserve. Greta sat on the bunk beside hers. Tears ran down her face, silent tears, the kind you cried when you were too tired to sob. We're alive, she whispered. We're actually alive. Mina said nothing. She lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Her hands had stopped shaking. Or maybe Annalise had just stopped noticing. You learn to stop noticing a lot of things. It was the only way to function. Ingrid Werner claimed a bunk near the door. Strategic position, old military habit. Always know your exits. Always position yourself to see threats coming. She unpacked her meager belongings with systematic efficiency, arranged them with hospital corners and precise spacing, order imposed on chaos, control maintained when everything else spiraled beyond control. Evening came. With it, an announcement. Dinner in 30 minutes. Report to the mess hall. The mess hall, that phrase carried weight, implied abundance, regularity, meals that came on schedule rather than as accidents of circumstance. Annalisa felt her stomach clench. Part anticipation, part dread. She had learned not to trust promises of food. Promises could be lies, promises could be tests, promises could be cruelty dressed as kindness. They filed into the mess hall at 1800 hours. Military precision, old habits, line up, wait, obey. The room looked like every military dining facility Annalisa had ever seen. Long tables in precise rows, the smell of industrial cooking, steam and grease and something that might have been meat. But there were differences, small ones, important ones. The tables were set with actual plates, not tin mess kits, real ceramic plates like people used in homes, like families used before the world forgot what families were. Forks and knives, laid out properly as if this were a restaurant, as if they were guests instead of prisoners. Annalisa exchanged glances with Greta, both women confused by these details, these unexpected gestures toward normalcy, toward dignity. An American corporal stood at the front, young. Ohio farm country written all over him. Thomas Whitfield, his name tag read. He spoke slowly, clearly. The way people speak when they know language is a barrier, but communication still matters. You'll be served your evening meal shortly. We eat at 0600, 1200 and 1800 daily. 3 meals, regular schedule. 3 meals, daily, regular. The words did not make sense, could not make sense. Annalisa's mind rejected them even as her body began to understand. 3 meals meant food every day, meant you could count on eating, meant tomorrow was not a question of if, but when. Kitchen staff emerged, carrying trays, large metal trays piled with food. The collective intake of breath was audible. 32 women breathing in at once. 32 women seeing what they had not seen in so long they had forgotten it was possible. Private Marcus Flynn set a plate in front of Annalisa, Irish, Chicago written in his vowels, ago. His hands were steady as he served, kind hands, careful hands, the hands of someone who had worked in kitchens and knew that food was more than fuel. Food was care made visible. Annalisa looked down at the plate. Mashed potatoes, real potatoes whipped with butter and milk until they formed a generous mound. Not the watery, greyish paste she had eaten in Berlin, not the mouldy scraps that had sustained her during the final collapse. Real potatoes that looked like food was supposed to look. Green beans, actually green, not the grey-brown of vegetables boiled into submission, not the stringy, bitter stems that passed for vegetables when vegetables were memory. These were bright, firm, properly cooked. And there, taking up nearly half the plate, 2 thick slices of meatloaf with rich brown gravy pooled around them. Meat, real meat, beef with actual fat content, seasoned, cooked until tender, served with gravy that smelled like Sunday dinners from childhood, like the world before it ended. This was more food than Annalisa had seen in a single meal in over a year, more food than made sense, more food than could be real. Around the mess hall, women sat frozen. Not one of them reached for a fork. They had been trained by deprivation, trained to expect tricks, to anticipate that abundance was always illusion, always temporary, always conditional. Greta stared at her plate as if it might vanish if she blinked. Her hands remained in her lap, unmoving, unwilling to trust what her eyes reported. Mina was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. In German, not for the Americans to hear, for the women. For themselves. Is this for all of us, Or are they testing to see who takes food first? The question reflected paranoia learned through experience. In the final months of the war, extra rations had sometimes been traps. Ways to identify hoarders, ways to test loyalty, ways to sort the weak from the strong, the selfish from the communal. They had learned that generosity often came with hidden costs, that nothing was given freely, that kindness was a weapon as often as cruelty. Ingrid Werner studied her plate with clinical detachment. Calculating, analyzing, her medical training taught her to assess situations objectively. The portions were substantial but not excessive. The food looked properly prepared, no signs of tampering or adulteration. Either this was genuine or it was extremely sophisticated psychological operation. She decided it did not matter. Either way, she needed to eat. Survival required calories. Speculation about motives was luxury for people with full stomachs. But she did not reach for her fork. Not yet. Old habits. Wait. Observe. Let others go first. Sergeant O'Malley stood near the door. He watched them, read their hesitation, understood it in a way that suggested his understanding came from somewhere personal, somewhere deep. He walked to an empty table, picked up a plate identical to theirs, sat down where all 32 women could see him clearly. He picked up his fork, cut into the meatloaf, took a bite, chewed, swallowed, made exaggerated gestures of satisfaction, almost theatrical, but not mocking, gentle, like coaxing frightened children instead of commanding enemy prisoners. "It's real," he said, his Boston accent thick as fog. "It's yours. Eat." The words were firm but gentle. An order that did not sound like an order, permission that did not require asking. Annalisa lifted her fork with a trembling hand. The metal felt heavy, or perhaps her hand was too weak. Months of poor nutrition did things to muscle, to coordination, to the simple mechanics of being human. She cut a small piece of meatloaf, half expected someone to stop her. Half expected this to be revealed as test or punishment, or some new variation of cruelty she had not yet encountered. No one stopped her. She brought the fork to her mouth. The taste of seasoned beef hit her tongue like memory made solid, like the past reaching through time to remind her that good things had once existed, did still exist, could exist again. Real meat, with fat, with flavor, cooked by someone who cared about cooking, who believed that food mattered, that the people eating it mattered. Around the hall, other women began to eat. Slowly at first, then faster, then with something approaching desperation. Annalisa finished her entire plate in less than 5 minutes. She did not remember making the decision to eat quickly. Her body simply took over. Operated on instinct older than thought. Consume while you can. Store what you're able. Survival does not wait for manners. She used bread to wipe up every trace of gravy, every molecule of fat and flavor. Nothing could be wasted. Waste was sin. Waste was forgetting that tomorrow might bring nothing. Ingrid Werner ate more slowly, methodically, clinical precision applied to consumption. She chewed each bite thoroughly, allowed her stomach time to register fullness. Medical knowledge overriding instinct. She knew that eating too fast after prolonged starvation led to complications, cramping, vomiting, worse. But even her discipline could not entirely suppress the emotion that welled up as she ate. This was real food, properly prepared, served without degradation or humiliation, offered as if they deserved it simply by virtue of being human. When her plate was empty, Annalisa looked around the mess hall with something approaching panic in her chest. The food was gone. The abundance had been temporary, just as she suspected it would be, just as everything good was always temporary, always conditional, always about to be taken away. But then Flynn was there again, with more bread, with butter, Actual butter in small paper packets, like restaurants used before restaurants became memories. More if you need it, miss. His voice was soft, kind. He looked at her not with pity, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. As if he understood hunger not from observation, but from proximity, from family stories, from inherited knowledge of what it meant to need. Other women were doing something strange. Greta, Mina, several others. They were slipping pieces of bread into their pockets when they thought no one was looking. Old habits, survival habits, habits formed in a world where the next meal was never guaranteed, where having food in your pocket meant the difference between making it through the night and not making it through the night. Annalisa saw Corporal Whitfield notice, saw him start to move forward, saw O'Malley catch his eye, shake his head slightly, a silent communication, an understanding. These women were not stealing, they were surviving the only way they knew how, and if that meant pocketing bread, then let them pocket bread. Dignity mattered more than regulations. Ingrid Werner did not pocket bread. She had no need for such gestures. But she watched the others do it and felt something shift inside her. These Americans were choosing not to humiliate, choosing to allow small dignities, choosing to see fear and trauma rather than malice. It was more than she had expected, more than she had dared to hope for. The meal ended, women rose from tables slowly, moving like people in dreams, uncertain if what just happened was real or if they would wake to find themselves still hungry, still hollow, still waiting. That night, Annalisa lay in her bunk and felt her stomach rebel. Rich food after prolonged starvation, the body did not know what to do, cramping, nausea, the uncomfortable sensation of being full. Actually full. She had forgotten what full felt like. Had forgotten that hunger had an opposite. That the ache could end. Around the barracks, she heard other women dealing with the same discomfort. Quiet groans, trips to the latrine, bodies adjusting to abundance after learning to function on nothing. Ingrid Werner lay awake as well, not from discomfort, from analysis, processing, trying to understand the strategic purpose behind this treatment. Geneva Convention required adequate food, but this exceeded adequate, this approach generous. Either the Americans had resources to waste, or they believed something about the value of humane treatment that went beyond legal requirements. Either possibility suggested things about this war's outcome that German propaganda had never acknowledged, but no one complained. Discomfort from eating too much was a luxury problem, a good problem, the kind of problem you were grateful to have. Greta whispered from the next bunk. Do you think it will continue? Annalisa did not answer immediately. She was thinking, processing, trying to reconcile what she had seen with what she had been told, with what propaganda had taught her, with what she thought she knew about Americans, about enemies, about the world. I do not know, she finally said, but they followed protocols, Geneva Convention, maybe. She did not finish, could not finish, because finishing meant hoping, and hope was still too dangerous, still too likely to break you. Morning came with surprising gentleness, no harsh wake-up calls, no shouting, a quiet announcement at 05:30 that breakfast would be served at 0600. They formed up, marched to the mess hall, uncertainty still heavy in the air. Last night could have been exception, could have been show. First impressions meant for propaganda purposes. Reality could still assert itself in the form of bread and water, in the form of deprivation dressed as discipline. The mess hall doors opened. The smell hit them first. Eggs, real eggs, scrambled, the smell of protein and fat and substance. The smell of food cooked by people who believed breakfast mattered. They sat, waited, watched. Plates arrived, scrambled eggs with actual yellow color. Not the grey paste of powdered substitute, not the watery nothing that German military kitchens had called eggs for the past 2 years. These were real, fresh, cooked properly. Beside the eggs, thick slices of toast, bread that had been bred recently enough to remember being soft, that had not moulded, had not hardened into weapon-worthy density. And on each table, small dishes, glass dishes containing something Annalisa recognized but did not trust herself to name. Butter, real butter, not the grey margarine that had become the only option in the final years of the war, not the rancid oil-based spread that tasted like desperation. This was butter, pale yellow, solid, real. Annalisa stared at the butter dish as if it were made of gold, as if it were artifact from lost civilization, as if it were proof that the world she remembered had actually existed and had not been fever dream invented by starving mind. She remembered butter from childhood in Berlin, before the war consumed everything. Her mother used to spread it thick on warm bread on Sunday mornings, small luxury that made the day feel special, made life feel like something worth celebrating rather than something to endure. That memory belonged to a different person, a different world, a different reality, where food was expected rather than miracle. She reached out, tentative, took a small portion of butter, spread it carefully on toast, the yellow smeared across brown bread. Visual proof of abundance, of possibility. She bit into the toast. The taste, when it hit her tongue, produced a sound from her throat, involuntary. Something between gasp and sob. Not quite either. Both at once. It was not just the richness, not just the dairy fat or the salt making her taste buds remember they were capable of pleasure. It was the realization, the understanding that she had been living in deprivation for so long that she had forgotten what normal food tasted like, that she had accepted scarcity as permanent condition, that she had stopped believing in abundance even as possibility. The propaganda had told them Germany was winning, that sacrifices were temporary, that abundance would return with victory. All lies, every word lies. She was eating better as a prisoner of America than she had eaten as a free citizen of Germany. The mathematics of that reality did not make sense, could not make sense, required complete recalibration of everything she thought she understood. Greta ate more slowly this time, her body adjusting, learning to trust that food would keep coming, that this meal would not be the last, that tomorrow would bring breakfast again, and the day after that, and the day after that. She watched Flynn as he moved between tables, refilling coffee cups, real coffee, not the chicory substitute or acorn mixture that had passed for coffee in Germany for years. This was actual coffee, dark, aromatic. The smell alone was worth more than words. Across the table, Mina spoke quietly in German, her voice carrying weight, carrying understanding that cut through everything else. They feed their prisoners better than our government fed its soldiers. The observation hung in the air, heavy, undeniable, true in a way that required response but made response impossible. Other women nodded slowly, silent acknowledgement, the implications of that simple truth beginning to reshape understanding, beginning to crack foundations, beginning to make them question everything they had been told about the war, about America, about their own country's priorities. Ingrid Werner set down her fork, looked at Mina directly. Her voice was quiet but carried authority earned through years of watching suffering. Our government fed ideology instead of people, fed belief systems instead of bodies. They chose symbols over substance. It was perhaps the most political statement she had made since capture, the most explicit acknowledgement that something had been fundamentally wrong with the system they had served. Several women stared at her, shocked. Ingrid Werner was known for stoicism, for emotional restraint, for refusing to engage in discussions that went beyond immediate practical concerns. But butter had broken through even her clinical detachment. Real butter on real bread served by enemies who treated them better than friends ever had. Some truths could not be ignored even by the most disciplined mind. Sergeant O'Malley stood near the door, watching. He saw the moment, the shift, when disbelief began transforming into something else, not quite trust yet, but perhaps the foundation of trust, the possibility that trust might someday be possible. His grandmother had come to Boston from Ireland during the famine. She had told him stories about arriving in America, about her amazement at American plenty after the deprivation of starvation, about learning that the world could be different than the world you knew. These German women were having their own version of that revelation, their own moment of understanding that everything they thought they knew was incomplete at best, false at worst. Corporal Whitfield approached O'Malley midway through breakfast, spoke quietly. "Sergeant, some of the women are asking about seconds. Should we allow it?" O'Malley considered. Captain Bradford had been clear. Gradual increases, medical supervision, refeeding syndrome was real, fatal if mishandled. But he also understood psychology, understood that trust was built through actions more than words, that these women needed to know abundance was real, was available, was not trick or trap or temporary gift to be revoked at whim. Let them have seconds, but remind Flynn to keep portions reasonable. We're building trust here, not just feeding bodies. By the end of breakfast, something had shifted in the mess hall, subtle but real. The women were talking more freely, voices less hushed. A few even smiled, small smiles, careful smiles, but smiles nonetheless. Days passed, became week. The meals continued 3 times daily, regular as clockwork. Portions that seemed impossibly generous, food that tasted like someone cared about flavor, about presentation, about the experience of eating rather than just the mechanics of nutrition. Annalisa found herself assigned to work details, administrative filing, organizing records, her German efficiency proving useful even in captivity. Corporal Whitfield supervised, patient man, kind. He explained things carefully when she struggled with English, never made her feel stupid for not understanding, never showed impatience with her slow progress. Greta worked in laundry, Mina helped with cleaning. Ingrid Werner was assigned to the medical bay, her nursing experience too valuable to waste on general labor. The American medics welcomed her expertise, asked her questions about field hospital procedures, treated her like colleague rather than prisoner. It was disorienting, being treated as if their skills mattered, as if they had value beyond their labor, as if they were professionals who happened to be on the wrong side rather than enemies who deserved nothing but contempt. March 17th arrived with unusual activity in the camp kitchen. Flynn had been working since dawn, but the day's menu was not his usual creation. O'Malley had requested special permission from Captain Bradford, had made his case carefully, respectfully, with the kind of logic that appealed to Bradford's sense of order and propriety. If we're going to show them what America is about, we might as well show them all of it, including how we celebrate. Bradford had considered, had consulted medical staff about dietary implications, had weighed regulations against human factors, had made decision that surprised even her. Approved, but keep portions sensible. We're still managing refeeding protocols. The German women noticed different smells during morning work assignments, something rich and savory mixed with earthy vegetable aroma they could not quite identify. Unfamiliar but compelling, promising but uncertain. Annalisa had been assigned to administrative filing as usual. She asked Whitfield about the unusual kitchen activity, the smells, the preparations. He grinned. "Special holiday. You'll see at lunch." His tone suggested good news, but she had learned not to trust suggestions, not to build expectations. Expectations were vulnerable things, easily shattered. Noon approached. Formation for lunch. March to mess hall. routine establishing itself, patterns emerging from chaos. But today was different. The mess hall had been decorated, green paper streamers hung from ceiling, salvaged from storage somewhere, faded but festive, creating atmosphere of celebration rather than confinement. A hand-lettered sign hung near the serving line, written in both English and somewhat awkwardly translated German. "Happy St. Patrick's Day." The women filed in, curiosity replacing uncertainty. After a week of regular, generous meals, they had begun to believe the food was real, would continue. But nothing prepared them for what came next. Flynn and 2 other kitchen staff emerged, carrying enormous platters. The portions they placed before each woman made previous meals look modest by comparison. A massive slice of corned beef dominated the plate, pink and tender, so large it overhung the ceramic edge, more meat than any of them had seen in single serving in years. Beside it sat a mountain of boiled cabbage, still bright green, still steaming, cooked properly so it retained structure instead of dissolving into mush, boiled potatoes, carrots, a thick slice of brown bread with butter already applied. This was feast, this was celebration. This was the kind of meal wealthy families might have served before the war, when food was abundant and celebrations were common. Greta simply stared, unable to process, her hands frozen in lap. Brain unable to reconcile reality before her with everything she thought she knew about captivity, about punishment, about what happened to defeated enemies. Ingrid Werner looked at her plate with expression that might have been surprise if she allowed herself such emotions. This was excessive, beyond necessary, beyond required by any convention or protocol. This was statement, message, communication through food about values and priorities and fundamental beliefs about human dignity. O'Malley stood at the front of the mess hall. He cleared his throat, spoke with unusual emotion, with pride that transcended military bearing. Today is St. Patrick's Day. In America, especially for us Irish, we celebrate with this meal, corned beef and cabbage. It's tradition. He paused, looked around the room, made eye contact with individual women, made sure they understood he was speaking to them, including them. And in America, everyone's a little bit Irish on St. Patrick's Day, even you ladies. The words landed like physical things, heavy with implication, light with invitation. They were not being fed as prisoners. They were being included as guests, as people, as humans, deserving of celebration despite everything that separated them from their captors. Annalisa understood enough English to grasp the meaning. This abundance, this feast, was for a celebration, and somehow, impossibly, they were being included in it, not as enemies, not as prisoners, but as people who deserved to share in the joy of the day. She picked up her fork, cut into the corned beef. The meat fell apart at the slightest pressure, tender and seasoned with spices she could not name, would not have recognized even if she could. Around the hall, other women began to eat. And then something unprecedented happened. They could not stop. Not because they were starving, that edge had dulled over the past week. Not because they feared the food would disappear. They were learning to trust its continuity. They could not stop because the food was genuinely delicious, because for the first time in years they were allowed to enjoy a meal without guilt, without fear, without the constant awareness that someone else was going without so they could eat. This was permission to experience pleasure, to remember that food could be more than fuel, could be joy, could be connection, could be proof that the world still contained good things. Mina Lehman took her third bite of corned beef and felt something crack inside her chest. Not physically, something deeper. A defensive barrier she had built to survive loss, to endure separation from her sons, to keep functioning when everything she believed had crumbled into ash. This simple act, this inclusion of enemy prisoners in an American holiday celebration, had accomplished what months of defeat and capture had not. It made her question everything. She looked around the mess hall, saw the same realization dawning on other faces. These American soldiers were not monsters, not the cruel oppressors that German propaganda had described in endless broadcasts and posters and newsreels. They were men who celebrated their heritage with food, who wanted to share that joy even with their enemies, who believed that on certain days everyone deserved to be included, everyone deserved to feast. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, physical, like standing in two realities at once and feeling yourself split between them. How could the same country that was destroying Germany in battle also be the country that served feasts to its prisoners? How could both truths exist in the same world, in the same moment? Annalisa had stopped eating, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. She watched Sergeant O'Malley as he moved between tables, clearly pleased with himself, satisfied in the way of people who have done good work and know it. He stopped to refill water glasses, to answer questions in his patient, broken German, to ensure everyone had enough of everything. There was no calculation in his kindness, no sense that he expected anything in return, no suggestion that this generosity came with strings attached or prices to be paid later. He simply seemed to believe that this was the right way to treat people, even people whose country had been at war with his, even people who wore the uniform of his enemy, even people who had lost. Greta leaned close to Annalisa, whispered in German. "My brother wrote to me before I lost contact. He was being held in a British camp. He said they gave them tea and biscuits, but nothing like this. He said the British were correct, but cold." She gestured at the overflowing plate, at the celebration, at the inclusion. "This is something else entirely." Across the table, a woman named Isolde Bauer spoke up, her voice carrying a tremor that was part emotion, part confession. She was 29, had worked in the propaganda office in Hamburg, had typed reports, had written articles, had helped construct the lies. "I worked in the propaganda office. I typed reports about American brutality, about how they bombed civilians without mercy, about how they were coming to destroy our way of life." She paused, tears forming in her eyes. Not the silent tears of exhaustion, the tears of shame, of understanding arrived at too late. "We wrote those things while we were starving, and now I am eating better as their prisoner than I ever did as a free German." The observation sparked a wave of similar confessions throughout the hall. Women began sharing their experiences with propaganda, with the lies they had been told, with the lies they had helped spread, with the growing realization that their own government had been their real enemy all along. Not the Americans across the Atlantic, not the British across the Channel, their own leaders, their own system, their own belief in superiority and destiny and righteous cause. The meal that day became more than just a feast. It became catalyst for truth, excuse for honesty, safe space to acknowledge what they had begun to suspect but could not say. Flynn noticed that several women had barely touched their food, too overwhelmed by emotion to eat. He approached their table quietly, spoke in his gentle way, his English simple but sincere. "Take your time. Food will stay warm, no rush." His broken syntax somehow made the message more genuine. These men were trying to communicate across language barrier, across war, across every reason they should hate each other, simply because they believed in treating people with dignity. Ingrid Werner had been eating steadily, methodically, but she paused now, set down her fork, looked at Isolde directly. "We all participated, some knowingly, some unknowingly, but we all contributed to a system that valued ideology over people, that chose destruction over construction." Her voice was clinical, detached, but underneath ran current of something else. Guilt, maybe, or regret, or simple recognition that she had failed to question when questioning mattered most. These Americans are showing us what we should have been, what Germany could have been if it had chosen differently, if it had valued people over power. The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication, with judgment, with challenge to accept uncomfortable truths rather than hide behind convenient excuses. Annalisa finally resumed eating, but slowly now, deliberately, savoring each bite. She was memorizing this moment, this meal, this feeling of being treated as human rather than as enemy. She knew that whatever happened next, whether they were eventually sent back to Germany or kept in America or shipped somewhere else entirely, this day would mark the moment when everything changed, the moment when she stopped being what Germany had told her to be and started becoming something else, something new, something she did not have words for yet. The afternoon passed in pleasant haze. Women returned to barracks talking, discussing, processing. The celebration had opened floodgates, made it safe to question, to doubt, to acknowledge that the world they had believed in might never have existed at all. That evening, O'Malley made his rounds through the barracks. Through windows, he could see women talking in animated German, gestures suggesting intense discussion. He did not need to understand their language to know what they were debating. The war, the lies, the propaganda, the growing realization that everything they had been taught was suspect. Everything they had believed required re-examination. He felt satisfaction in that, not triumph, not vindication, just quiet satisfaction that showing kindness had accomplished more than lectures or punishment ever could. That treating enemies like people made them question why they had ever been enemies at all. 2 days after the celebration, the kitchen routine shifted. Flynn had requested help, actually requested it, had gone to Captain Bradford and explained that he was overwhelmed, that the increased meal requirements for 32 additional people, plus the American staff, had pushed him beyond capacity. Bradford had considered carefully. Allowing prisoners into the kitchen meant giving them access to knives, to potential weapons, to supplies that could be hoarded or stolen or turned into tools of escape or resistance. But it also meant showing trust, and trust was what they were building here. Trust was the foundation of everything else. 5 women were selected, Annalise among them. When Corporal Whitfield escorted her to the kitchen on a cool April morning, she felt nervousness that had nothing to do with fear. She was about to work alongside the men who had been feeding her, about to learn the secrets of the abundance that had transformed her understanding of captivity. Flynn greeted her with a slight nod, respectful, professional, the greeting of one worker to another, not captor to prisoner, not victor to defeated, cook to assistant cook. The language barrier presented immediate challenges. Flynn spoke minimal German. Annalise's English, while improving daily, was still basic, full of gaps and misunderstandings and moments where meaning got lost between intention and expression. But food, they discovered, had its own language, universal grammar of heat and seasoning and timing. Flynn demonstrated techniques with his hands, showed her measurements he used, guided her through the proper way to season meat before cooking. Annalisa watched with intensity of someone memorizing sacred texts. These were not just cooking methods. They were proof that abundance was possible, that food could be more than mere survival, that meals could be created with care instead of assembled from whatever scraps remained. Flynn worked like someone who had grown up in kitchens, movements efficient but not hurried, confident but not showy. His hands knew what they were doing because they had done it 1,000 times before. "My ma ran an Irish pub in Chicago," he said, while showing Annalisa how to properly brown meat. "I learned to cook before I learned to read." She said feeding people was holy work, said it mattered how you did it. His voice carried respect when he spoke of his mother, the kind of respect that suggested deep love, strong influence, foundation of character. She said you could tell what a person believed about the world by how they cooked. Sloppy cooking meant sloppy thinking. Careful cooking meant you thought people mattered. He looked at Annalisa directly, made sure she understood. People matter, even when they're supposed to be your enemy. Even when everything says you should hate them, people still matter. Within days, the kitchen had become center of unexpected cultural exchange. Greta joined the rotation. She taught Flynn how to make Kartoffelpuffer, German potato pancakes, using the camp's plentiful potato supply. Flynn, in turn, showed the women how to make simple Irish stew, how to layer flavors, how to make cheap cuts of meat tender through patience and low heat and time. Mina demonstrated the proper way to make spätzle, the tiny noodles that had been staple of her childhood, though the resulting noodles were incorporated into an American chicken soup that would have scandalized traditional German cooks back home. The conversations in the kitchen, conducted in broken English and fragmentary German, supplemented with elaborate hand gestures, covered more than just recipes. Flynn told stories about his parents, about growing up Irish in Chicago, about facing discrimination despite being born American, about being called names, treated as foreign, seen as less than. People told my dad to go back where he came from. He'd say, I came from Chicago, General Hospital. Where should I go? Back to the maternity ward. He laughed at the memory. But the laughter carried edge, carried understanding of what it meant to be treated as other, to be judged for things you could not control. Annalisa shared memories of Berlin before the war, when different cultures had mingled freely in the city's cafes and theaters and universities, when Berlin had been cosmopolitan, progressive, open. There was a cafe near my apartment, she said, struggling with English but pushing through, run by a Jewish family, best coffee in Berlin. They knew everyone knew them. She paused, the weight of what came next pressing down. When they took them away, no one said anything. We stopped going to that cafe, pretended it never existed. Flynn did not respond immediately, just kept working, kept chopping vegetables. But his silence was listening silence, respectful silence, the silence of someone who understood that some confessions required space rather than response. Sergeant O'Malley made habit of stopping by the kitchen during meal preparations. He noticed how the women's faces had changed, the hollow desperation replaced by concentration, by purpose, by something that looked almost like contentment. Annalisa had gained weight, not much. The refeeding was still gradual, still medically supervised, but enough that her uniform no longer hung quite so loose. Her hands, steady now and no longer trembling, moved with confidence as she chopped vegetables. One afternoon, as Annalise helped Flynn prepare dinner, she paused, gathered courage, spoke carefully in English. Private Flynn, I must ask question. Flynn looked up from the pot he was stirring. Sure thing. Why you are so kind to us? We are enemy. The question was direct, blunt. The kind of question that language barrier made easier to ask. When you did not have words for subtlety, you went straight to the heart. Flynn considered seriously before responding. His English, equally careful, equally honest. My ma taught me that people are people. War is something governments do. Kindness is something people do. He stirred the pot thoughtfully before continuing. In Chicago, people treated my family like we were enemy too, even though we are American. I know what it feels like to be judged for things you cannot control, so I choose to see people, not enemies. His words settled over Annalisa like weight, like responsibility, like invitation to think differently about everything she thought she knew. She had been part of a system that reduced people to categories, to useful or useless, to Aryan or subhuman, to ally or enemy. The simplicity of Flynn's philosophy, that people were simply people, felt revolutionary. She returned to chopping vegetables, but her mind was elsewhere, wrestling with implications that extended far beyond the kitchen, far beyond this camp, into territory of moral reckoning she was not sure she was ready to enter. Late April brought announcement that changed emotional landscape of the camp. Captain Bradford called assembly in the mess hall, all 32 women present, the American staff along the walls, formal atmosphere that suggested important news. Bradford stood at the front, rigid posture, professional bearing, but something in her eyes suggested this announcement carried weight even for her. The International Red Cross has approved communication protocols. You will be permitted to write letters home, 1 letter per week, subject to review for security purposes, but you may contact your families. The news brought complicated mixture of relief and dread. They wanted desperately to contact families, to know who had survived the war's final months, to let loved ones know they were alive. But they also faced impossible question. How could they describe their current situation without seeming to betray their country, or worse, without rubbing salt in wounds they knew were raw? Bradford continued, "Additionally, I want you to know that local church groups have been contacted about potential sponsorship opportunities, should the war end, should repatriation procedures allow for alternatives." She paused, measured her words carefully. A widow in Philadelphia, Mrs. Bridget O'Sullivan, Irish immigrant. She lost her son in France. She has expressed interest in sponsoring several women, providing housing and employment. She believes, and I quote, that the best way to honor her son's sacrifice is to prove that good people can build peace even after war tears everything apart. The announcement sent ripples through the assembled women. Sponsorship, alternatives to repatriation, possibility of staying in America. It was too much to process, too large to comprehend, too dangerous to hope for. That evening, Annalisa sat in the barracks common room with piece of paper in front of her and pencil in hand. She had been staring at the blank page for 20 minutes, the white space mocking her, demanding words she did not have. How could she tell her mother, if her mother was even alive, that she was eating 3 full meals a day, that she had gained weight since becoming prisoner, that American soldiers served her feasts while German civilians were reportedly eating grass and tree bark to survive? The truth felt like betrayal, like flaunting good fortune in face of suffering, like choosing comfort over solidarity. But lies felt worse, felt like continuing the propaganda, like pretending that Germany had been right, that America was enemy, that everything she now knew to be false was somehow still true. She finally began to write, choosing words with excruciating care. "Dear Mama, I am alive and safe. I am being held in an American prison camp in Pennsylvania. We are treated according to international law. Please write to me if you receive this letter. I need to know you survived. Your daughter, Annalisa." She stared at the inadequate words. Everything important remained unsaid, trapped between loyalty and honesty, between what she should say and what she needed to say. Greta took different approach. She decided to risk the truth, or at least part of it, believed that honesty, however painful, mattered more than comfortable lies. "Dear Papa, you would not believe the food they give us here. Yesterday we had roasted chicken with vegetables. Today beef stew with fresh bread. I know this will be hard to read when you are struggling, but I need you to understand something. We were lied to about everything. The Americans are not what we were told. I am safe. I am fed. I am beginning to understand how terribly wrong we were." She sealed the letter, knowing it might never reach her father. Or worse, that it might reach him and break his heart. That it might make him question everything he had believed, everything he had sacrificed for. But she could not bring herself to lie anymore. The feast had been turning point. She could not pretend that her captivity was hardship when it was actually salvation. Mina wrote the most painful letter of all. She had learned through Red Cross channels that her husband had been killed during the defense of Berlin. Her two sons, ages 8 and 11, were somewhere in the Soviet occupation zone with her sister. "My dearest boys, Mama is alive and safe in America. I am eating well and staying strong so that someday I can find you again. The people here are kind. Do not be afraid of Americans if you ever meet them. They are not our enemies. They never were. I love you more than words can say. I will come for you. I promise, Mama." Throughout the barracks, similar scenes played out. Women wrestling with impossible truths, trying to compress months of transformation into letters that would pass through military censors, through ideological filters, through systems designed to control information rather than facilitate communication. Some chose silence about the food, fearing their families would think them traitors for thriving in captivity, for accepting comfort from the enemy, for forgetting their duty to suffer alongside their people. Others, like Greta, chose brutal honesty, hoping the truth might somehow help loved ones understand the magnitude of the lies they had all been told, the depth of deception they had all accepted, the price they had all paid for believing. Sergeant O'Malley collected the letters that evening. He had been warned by Captain Bradford to read them for security purposes, to check for coded messages, for intelligence that could be passed to enemies still fighting, for anything that might compromise operational security. But as he scanned the carefully written words, read the struggles between truth and loyalty, saw the pain of women trying to communicate across chasms of experience and understanding, he found himself moved by their raw honesty. These were not enemy combatants, not ideological soldiers, not people who wanted war or believed in conquest or celebrated violence. These were just women, caught in machine larger than themselves, trying to survive, trying to maintain humanity, trying to find way forward when every path seemed to lead through pain. May arrived with rumors that could not be confirmed but would not disappear, whispers in German during work details, fragments of conversation overhead from American soldiers, hints in the way officers carried themselves. Something was happening, something big, something that would change everything. Ingrid Werner, working in the medical bay, heard the American medics discussing it. The war was ending, Hitler was reportedly dead, Germany collapsing on all fronts, unconditional surrender imminent. She did not share this information immediately, wanted to confirm, wanted to be certain, did not want to raise hopes that might be crushed. But she watched, waited, prepared herself for what came next. May 8th, 1945. Captain Bradford called emergency assembly, all personnel, American staff and German prisoners together. The formality of it, the urgency, made clear that this was not routine announcement. Bradford stood at the front of the mess hall, rigid as always, professional as always, but something in her eyes suggested even she was processing this news in real time, adjusting to new reality that had arrived faster than expected. The war in Europe has officially ended. Adolf Hitler is dead. Germany has surrendered unconditionally to Allied forces. She paused. Let the words sink in. Let the weight of them settle. Repatriation procedures will begin soon. You will be processed and returned to Germany within months, perhaps weeks. The International Red Cross will coordinate with German authorities to facilitate your return. The announcement should have brought relief, should have brought joy, should have brought celebration that the killing had stopped, that the war was over, that they had survived. Instead, it brought heavy silence, not the hollow silence of exhaustion, not the frightened silence of uncertainty, a different silence. The silence of people realizing that ending one nightmare might mean beginning another. That evening, Annalisa sat with Greta and Mina in their barracks. Speaking in German for first time in days, they had grown accustomed to speaking English, to functioning in this American world. The prospect of returning to Germany felt like being asked to go backward into darkness after experiencing light. "What is there to go back to?" Mina asked quietly, her voice carrying despair that ran deeper than words. "My husband is dead. My sons are in the Soviet zone where I cannot reach them. Berlin is rubble. What life awaits me there?" Greta voiced what others were thinking but afraid to say. Afraid to acknowledge even to themselves, because acknowledging meant confronting terrible choice between duty and survival. "Here I have purpose. I help in the kitchen. I am learning English well now. People treat me with respect. In Germany, I will be seen as failure, as someone who was captured, as someone who collaborated with enemy by working with them." She gestured around the barracks, at the clean space, the full stomachs, the absence of bombs and starvation, and constant fear. This has become more of a home than Munich ever was. Annalisa understood their feelings because she shared them, but she also felt pull of duty, sense that abandoning Germany in its darkest hour was kind of betrayal. That choosing easier path made her complicit in something she could not name but felt deeply. "We cannot simply choose the easier path because America has better food," she said, though her words lacked conviction, sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Our country needs rebuilding. Our people are suffering. They need everyone who survived." "Our country," Mina replied, her voice bitter with understanding that had come too late, with anger at herself as much as at Germany. "Our country created the suffering. Our government lied to us, starved us, led us into war that destroyed everything. Why do we owe loyalty to that?" The question hung unanswered in the air, hung heavy and sharp and impossible to dismiss, because there was no good answer, no response that satisfied both heart and duty, both survival and honor. Ingrid Werner, sitting on her bunk near the door, spoke for first time in the conversation. Her voice was calm, clinical, the voice of someone who had made her decision and found peace in it. "I am returning, not because Germany deserves my loyalty, but because my skills are needed there. Field hospitals, medical care. The wounded and sick do not care about politics or propaganda. They need nurses who know how to save lives." She looked at each of them in turn. "That is my duty. Not to nation, not to ideology, to people who will die without help. Each of you must find your own duty, your own truth. But do not let anyone tell you what that must be." Over the following days, women had similar conversations throughout the camp. Some felt duty-bound to return despite the hardship, despite knowing they would face poverty and judgment and years of reconstruction in defeated nation. Others began to whisper about possibility of staying, though no one knew if such thing was even possible. If America would allow former enemies to remain, if there was legal pathway from prisoner to immigrant, from defeated to welcomed. The choice between going home hungry or staying fed had become choice between duty and survival, between loyalty to country that had betrayed them and pragmatic recognition that sometimes survival requires abandoning sinking ships, between who they had been taught to be and who they were learning they could become. One afternoon in mid-May, Bradford called Annalisa to her office. Private meeting, just the two of them, formal but not hostile, professional but not cold. Bradford gestured to chair, waited for Annalisa to sit, then sat herself. Careful maintenance of protocol even in informal conversation. "I have been observing you, Hartmann. You work well in the kitchen. Your English improves daily. You show initiative and reliability." She paused, measuring her words with same precision she measured everything. "The repatriation will begin soon, but there may be options. For some, not guarantees, but possibilities." Dear, Annalisa's heart beat faster, understanding without needing explicit statement. There might be way to stay, might be process, might be future that did not require returning to rubble and starvation and occupation zones. What would be required? Bradford appreciated the directness, the lack of pretense, the simple question that went straight to practical matters. Sponsorship, an American family willing to guarantee housing and employment, letters of recommendation from military personnel, immigration processing, legal petitions. It would not be easy. There would be resistance, but it might be possible. She looked directly at Annalise, woman to woman, not officer to prisoner, not American to German. Two people discussing futures in world that had changed too fast for anyone to fully comprehend. Mrs. O'Sullivan, the widow I mentioned, has confirmed her interest. She could sponsor 5 women, perhaps 6. If you decide you want to try, I will help where I can. Annalisa left the office with mind racing, hope and guilt warring inside her. Hope that she might stay, guilt that wanting to stay felt like betrayal of everyone who had to return, everyone who did not have options, everyone still suffering. That night, she wrote second letter to her mother. Different from the first, more honest, more raw. Dear Mama, the war is over. I know you have heard. I know Germany is occupied now, divided. I do not know what awaits when I return, but I want you to know. If I had choice, if there was way to stay here, I think I would take it. Not because I love Germany less, but because I cannot go back to the lies, cannot pretend everything was noble sacrifice. I have seen what truth looks like, and I cannot unsee it. I hope you can understand. I hope you can forgive. I love you, Annalisa. She sealed the letter knowing her mother might never read it. Might have died in the bombing. Might have starved in the final months. Might be lost to history, along with so much else. But she needed to write it, needed to confess, needed to put into words the transformation that had occurred inside her between March and May, between arrival and understanding, between hunger and abundance. The choice would come soon. The decision would be hers. And whatever she chose would change everything that came after. The camp divided itself without anyone drawing lines. No official announcement, no formal separation. But within days of the surrender, 32 women had sorted themselves into 2 distinct groups. Those who would return, those who would try to stay. 14 women chose return. Duty pulled them. Loyalty to families still in Germany. Belief that rebuilding required everyone who survived. Sense that abandoning homeland in darkest hour was cowardice dressed as pragmatism. 18 women chose to try to stay. Survival pulled them. Recognition that Germany they had known no longer existed. Understanding that sometimes saving yourself was not betrayal, but necessary act of self-preservation. The division created tension that had not existed before. Suspicion, judgment. The kind of moral certainty that comes from believing your choice is the only righteous choice. It began with small things. Separate tables in the mess hall. Conversations that stopped when someone from the other group approached. Looks that carried weight of accusation, of disappointment, of fundamental disagreement about what it meant to be German, to be loyal, to be good. By late May, the split had hardened into something approaching hostility. Annalisa found herself caught between. Part of the stay group by decision, but understanding the return group's perspective. Respecting their choice even as she made different one. She sat in the barracks one evening, Greta beside her, Mina across. The 3 of them had become unit within unit. Sisters forged by shared experience rather than blood. Ingrid Werner approached, her face carrying the certainty of someone who had made her decision and would not be swayed. She had announced days ago that she would return, would take her medical skills back to Germany, would help rebuild healthcare system from rubble. Hartman, we need to talk. Her tone suggested this was not invitation, was confrontation, was judgment delivered with expectation of defense. Annalisa stood, faced her. What is it, Werner? Real Germans rebuild their country. They don't abandon it because Americans serve better meals. The accusation hung in the air. Simple, brutal, designed to wound. Greta started to respond, but Annalisa raised hand. This was her fight, her choice, her defense to make or not make. I am not abandoning Germany because of food, Werner. I am refusing to return to a system that lied to us, starved us, destroyed everything it touched. Werner's face hardened. So you will stay here, become American, forget where you came from, forget who you are. I will never forget where I came from, but I will also never forget what Germany became, what it did, what it stood for. The conversation drew others. Women from both groups, Americans too, sensing confrontation, drawn to drama the way humans always are. Werner pressed harder. You think staying here makes you better than us? Makes you more enlightened? You're just taking the easy path, choosing comfort over duty. Annalisa felt anger rising, but also sadness, because she understood Werner's position, understood why some people needed to believe in duty and loyalty and sacrifice, needed those concepts to make sense of suffering, to give meaning to loss. I think, she said carefully, that there are different kinds of duty, different kinds of loyalty, and I think our government forfeited right to either when it chose to destroy rather than build, to lie rather than lead, to sacrifice its people for ideology rather than protect them. Mina stepped forward, her voice quiet but carrying weight of someone who had lost everything and found unexpected grace in surrender. My sons are in Soviet zone. I must return. I have no choice. But I do not judge Annalisa for her choice. Do not judge Greta. They are doing what they must to survive, just as I am doing what I must. She looked at Werner directly, challenge in her gaze. We all make choices, we all live with consequences, but we do not get to decide what is right for others, only for ourselves. Werner looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Mina's eyes stopped her. Maybe recognition that Mina's sacrifice, her return to uncertainty and probable hardship, gave her moral authority that Werner's righteousness could not match. The confrontation ended, but the division remained, and would remain, because some fractures go too deep to heal. Some choices create permanent separation between people who might otherwise have remained united. June brought American military lawyers to the camp. They explained process, requirements, legal pathways from prisoner to immigrant. The bureaucracy was massive, designed to discourage as much as facilitate. But it existed. There was process, there was possibility. Each woman who wanted to stay needed sponsor. American family or organization willing to guarantee housing and employment, willing to vouch for character, willing to accept responsibility for former enemy. They needed letters of recommendation from military personnel, proof of good conduct, evidence that they posed no security threat, no ideological danger, no risk to American society. They needed to pass immigration interviews, answer questions about political beliefs, about loyalty, about willingness to embrace American values and reject Nazi ideology. The process would take months, maybe longer. No guarantees, no promises, just possibility wrapped in paperwork and conditional on approval from authorities who had every reason to say no. Sergeant O'Malley began writing letters. So did Flynn, Bradford, even Corporal Whitfield, who barely knew most of the women but recognized their humanity and believed that mattered more than nationality. The letters were careful, professional. emphasizing rehabilitation and transformation, emphasizing evidence of character change, using language calculated to appeal to bureaucratic mindset while remaining fundamentally honest. O'Malley's letter for Annalise was particularly detailed, described her work in kitchen, her language acquisition, her cooperation and reliability, her transformation from suspicious prisoner to trusted worker. Mrs. Bridget O'Sullivan came to the camp in person one Sunday afternoon. Part of church outreach program, she was 65 years old, silver hair pulled back in neat bun, eyes that had seen too much suffering to be fooled by pretense but still held capacity for kindness. She met with Bradford first, then with the women who had expressed interest in her sponsorship, Annalise among them. O'Sullivan sat across from Annalise in Bradford's office, studied her with gaze that missed nothing. "My son died fighting your country," she said without preamble. "Killed in France, only child, his death hollowed me out." Annalisa did not know what to say, could not apologize for war she had not wanted, could not defend country that had betrayed her, could only sit silent and wait. "But I learned something from burying my boy," O'Sullivan continued. "Learned that hate is easy, kindness is hard. Hate would let me spit on you and call it justice. Kindness requires, I see you as human being who deserves chance." She leaned forward. "Tell me why you want to stay, and don't give me pretty words, give me truth." Annalisa took breath, gathered courage. "Because I cannot go back to pretending, cannot return to system built on lies. I have seen what truth looks like here, what kindness looks like, what it means when people choose to value humans over ideology." She paused. "My mother may be dead. My city is destroyed. Everything I knew is gone. If I return to ghosts, to rubble, to occupation and judgment and years of suffering for sins I did not commit, but could not prevent." O'Sullivan nodded slowly. "And what will you do here, if I sponsor you?" "Whatever you need. Cooking, cleaning. I will work. I will learn. I will become American if that is what it takes to build life worth living." O'Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Small smile, sad smile. "My boy would have liked you, would have said you were brave for choosing truth over comfort of familiar lies that he..." She stood, extended hand. "I will sponsor you, Miss Hartman, and 4 others. We'll make this work." The sponsorship changed everything, made possibility real, made staying achievable rather than just hopeful dream. The paperwork began, the interviews, the slow grinding machinery of bureaucracy processing former enemies into potential citizens. Meanwhile, the return group prepared to leave. 14 women packing meager belongings, receiving information about repatriation ships, about processing centers in Germany, about what to expect when they arrived in country they had left as Germans and would return to as occupied territory divided among victors. The goodbye came in late June, early morning, rain falling again, as if Pennsylvania weather understood significance of departures. The 14 assembled near the truck that would take them to processing center. From there to ships, from ships to Hamburg or Bremen or whatever port was receiving returnees. Annalisa stood with Greta, watching, feeling weight of separation, of permanent divergence, of paths splitting in ways that could never be rejoined. Mina approached them, her face set in expression of determination mixed with grief. She had to return. No choice. Her sons were somewhere in Soviet zone with her sister. She would find them or die trying. There was no other option. But leaving meant leaving women who had become family, meant severing bonds formed in shared suffering and unexpected grace, meant returning to alone when she had found belonging in captivity. "If I find my sons," she said quietly, voice steady despite tears running down her face, "I will bring them to America, somehow. I promise. I will find a way." She looked at Annalisa directly, eye to eye, soul to soul. "Remember me. Write to me if you can. Let me know you're alive, that you're happy." That choosing to stay was right choice. Annalisa embraced her, held tight, memorized the feeling because memory was all that would remain once Mina climbed into that truck. "I will write every month, I promise, and when you find your sons, when you bring them here, we will celebrate properly." Greta joined the embrace. 3 women holding each other. United by history they could never forget. Separated by choices they each had to make. Ingrid Werner stood apart, watching. She had said her goodbyes the night before. Practical as always, unsentimental as always, but she caught Annalisa's eye, nodded once. Small gesture of respect, of understanding that different choices could both be valid, both be right. The truck engine started, time was up. Departures did not wait for goodbyes to feel complete, did not wait for hearts to be ready. Mina climbed into the truck with the others. Werner, the 14 who chose duty over comfort, loyalty over pragmatism, return over stay. The truck rolled through the gates, disappeared into rain and distance. Annalisa stood watching long after it vanished. Stood in rain that soaked through clothes and chilled skin. Stood because movement felt like betrayal. Like accepting separation, like acknowledging that Mina was truly gone. 18 women remained at Camp Crossroads. Processing continued. Sponsorships solidified. Legal paperwork advanced through channels. The machinery of immigration grinding forward with bureaucratic indifference to human emotion. August brought final approvals. 18 women granted permission to remain in United States as refugees, subject to conditions, subject to monitoring, subject to revocation if they proved unworthy or dangerous or insufficiently grateful. September brought releases, transfers to sponsor families, beginning of lives outside camp, outside confinement, outside liminal space between prisoner and free. Annalisa moved into Mrs. O'Sullivan's house in Philadelphia, large Victorian in neighborhood called Germantown. The irony of address was not lost on anyone. The house was indeed large, too large for one elderly woman. Rooms that echoed with absence, with memory of family that no longer existed, with ghosts of son who would not return and husband who had died years before. Mrs. O'Sullivan was kind but not soft, expected work, expected gratitude expressed through action rather than words, expected transformation from prisoner to productive member of household and eventually of society. "I'm giving you chance," she said first day, voice carrying Irish lilt, softened by decades in America. "What you do with chance is up to you." Annalise worked, learned, transformed. She took English classes at night school, worked as clerk during day, helped maintain household in exchange for room and board. Mrs. O'Sullivan taught her American customs, American expectations, American ways of being that differed subtly but significantly from German ways. How to make small talk, how to smile at strangers, how to exist in culture that valued openness over formality, optimism over cynicism, future over past. Months passed, became year. 1946 brought spring and new routines and growing sense that maybe this could work. Maybe she could build life here. Maybe staying had been right choice. Greta opened small bakery in Boston, apprenticed first with German baker who needed help, then saved money, found investors, created business that served both German specialties and American favorites. Bridge between old world and new. She wrote letters, described success, described customers who did not care about her accent or her history, who cared only that bread was good and prices were fair, who treated her like any other baker, like any other person trying to make living in post-war America. Annalisa wrote to Mina every month, as promised, sent letters to Red Cross address in Germany, sent updates about life in Philadelphia, about Mrs. O'Sullivan, about work and English classes, and slowly growing confidence that she belonged here. No letters came back, month after month of silence. By end of 1946, Annalise assumed worst, that Mina had not survived return to Germany, that Soviet zone had claimed her, that she was lost along with so many others who vanished into chaos of occupation and displacement and post-war reckoning. She mourned privately, quietly, added Mina to list of people she had lost, people who existed now only in memory, in stories she told herself, in grief that would never quite heal, but eventually scabbed over enough to function around. 1947 brought unexpected developments. Annalise met Robert Callahan at church, Irish Catholic like Mrs. O'Sullivan, veteran who had fought in Europe, who had seen war up close and returned, carrying weight of it in eyes that understood things most people would never understand. He did not ask about her past at first, did not probe, did not demand confessions or apologies. Just talked to her like person, like someone worth knowing for who she was now, rather than judged for who she had been. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, two damaged people learning to trust again, learning that connection was possible, even after war tried to teach them that connection was weakness. By November they were courting, by December talking about future, about marriage, about building life together in country that had been enemy to both of them in different ways but now offered possibility that neither had expected to find. It was late December. Week before Christmas, Annalise was helping Mrs. O'Sullivan prepare dinner. Ordinary evening, nothing special, just routine of life lived in peaceful times. Knock at the door, 9 p.m., late for visitors, unusual enough to be notable. Mrs. O'Sullivan answered, her voice surprised, welcoming, calling for Annalisa. Annalisa walked to the door, wiping hands on apron, expecting neighbor, expecting Robert maybe, expecting anything except what she saw. Mina stood on the porch, thin, exhausted, but alive, and beside her, two boys, 10 and 13 now, gaunt, frightened, but alive. For a moment, Annalisa could not move, could not speak, could not process what her eyes reported. Mina was dead. Had to be dead. Months of silence proved it, confirmed it, made it real. But dead people did not stand on porches in Philadelphia in December, did not look at you with eyes full of tears and relief and desperate hope. Annalise. Mina's voice cracked, broke, reformed. I found them. I brought them. We're here. Annalisa moved then. Crossed space between door and porch in 2 steps. Pulled Mina into embrace that tried to communicate everything words could not. Joy and disbelief and gratitude and grief for months of thinking her dead. The boys stood uncertain, watching. These were American strangers in American house speaking American English. Everything foreign, everything frightening, everything new. Mrs. O'Sullivan appeared, took situation in with single glance. Irish grandmother who had seen enough of life to understand exactly what was happening without needing explanation. Bring them in, all of them, out of cold. Dinner's almost ready, I'll set extra places. Inside, warmth and light and safety. Mina collapsed into chair, not from physical exhaustion, though that was real, from emotional exhaustion, from carrying weight of impossible task for so long that she had almost forgotten what not carrying it felt like. The story came out slowly. Over dinner? Over tea after dinner? Over hours of careful explanation in German and broken English and gestures that transcended language. Mina had returned to Germany, found her sister in Hamburg, learned the boys had been taken to Soviet zone during final, chaotic retreat, had been lost in collapse and occupation, spent 10 months searching, bribing Soviet guards, trading everything she had for information, following rumors and hints and desperate leads that mostly went nowhere, found them finally in displaced persons camp outside Dresden, starving, sick, but alive, brought them across border at night, paid smugglers everything she had, risked being shot, risked being caught and sent back, made it to American zone, found Red Cross, explained situation, showed letters from Bradford, from O'Malley, proof that she had been prisoner at Camp Crossroads, that she had connections in America, that she was not security threat or ideological danger. Bradford had pulled strings, called in favors, used connections to process visa applications in months instead of years, got them aboard ship, got them to America, got them here. "I couldn't write," Mina explained, tears running down her face. "I couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk Soviet authorities knowing I was trying to get boys to America. Couldn't risk anything that might stop me." She looked at Annalisa with eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, survived too much. "I promised I would bring them. I kept my promise." The boys ate slowly, carefully. With same wariness Annalisa remembered from her own first meals at Camp Crossroads, same inability to trust abundance, same fear that food would disappear if they ate too fast or enjoyed too much. Annalisa found herself crying, not sad tears, not even entirely happy tears, complex tears that held too many emotions to name. Relief, joy, grief for what they had lost, gratitude for what survived, understanding that some miracles were not divine intervention, but human stubbornness refusing to accept defeat. Mrs. O'Sullivan, practical as always, began making arrangements. "The boys can stay in spare room, Mina too, until we sort out something more permanent. Tomorrow we'll register them for school, get them proper clothes, let them rest." She looked at Mina directly, grandmother to mother. Understanding to understanding. "You did well, girl, you did very well indeed." That night, after boys were asleep and Mina had finally allowed herself to stop being vigilant, Annalisa called Greta, who drove 6 hours from Boston through snow when she heard the news. 3 women, original 3, reunited against odds that should have kept them separated forever, connected by history no one else would fully understand, by transformation no one else had witnessed, by choice to survive when survival required becoming someone new. "We should celebrate," Greta said, properly. Annalisa knew exactly what she meant, knew without asking, knew because some traditions become sacred through experience rather than designation. 20 years later, March 17th, 1965. Annalise Callahan stood in her kitchen in Philadelphia. 44 years old. Grey threading through hair that had once been dark brown. Lines around eyes that came from smiling more than suffering, though suffering had carved its own paths too. She wore apron over nice dress. The day called for proper preparation, called for honoring tradition that had changed her life. The corned beef simmered on stove, cabbage boiled in separate pot, potatoes waited to be served, brown bread cooled on counter. Everything prepared exactly as she had learned 20 years ago from Private Marcus Flynn in prison camp kitchen. Her husband Robert moved through dining room, setting table, whistling Irish tune his father had taught him. Their 3 children helped, ages 17, 15, and 12, American children with no memory of war or hunger or displacement. The youngest daughter, Catherine, appeared in kitchen doorway. "Mama, why do we always have this same meal? We're not even Irish." Annalisa smiled, pulled her daughter close. This question came every year, and every year she answered because the answer mattered. Because this meal taught me something important, Liebchen. It taught me that kindness has a taste. The doorbell rang. Robert answered. Familiar voices in hallway, expected voices, loved voices. Greta entered, 61 now, successful baker, carrying pies she had made. German and American, bridge between worlds. Behind her came Mina, 67, her sons grown, both married, both giving her grandchildren who would never know hunger. Her face carried lines from suffering, but also joy that comes from survival against impossible odds. Mrs. O'Sullivan presided over table, 85 years old, matriarch who had built family from strangers and refugees and damaged souls. Robert raised his glass. To family, to second chances. They ate, celebrated, 3 generations at one table. American children asking questions about old country, German women answering in English that had become native. After dinner, Annalisa sat at her desk, wrote annual letter to Ingrid Werner in Hamburg, who had become teacher, who had helped rebuild West Germany, who wrote every year, maintaining connection across ocean and different choices. Dear Ingrid, another year. You asked if I ever regret my choice. The answer is still no. Not because Germany was wrong or America was right, but because I learned that home is not where you are from. It is where people see you as human. I hope you are well. I hope Hamburg is healing. With love, Annalisa. She sealed the letter, turned off lights, climbed stairs to bed beside husband who had learned to love German woman despite war. Sleep came easily, and somewhere in those dreams she was 24 again, sitting in mess hall, staring at plates she could not trust, learning that abundance was real, that kindness existed, that the world could be different. And she remembered, would always remember, that March day when American soldiers said, corned beef and cabbage, everyone's a little Irish today, and meant, you are welcome, you are human, you are home.